Hi, I'm Alex Farbstein. I'm a therapist in private practice in West LA, and I am one of the trainers with Family Services Santa Monica for our trauma education programs. And I used to be a therapist up in Malibu. I was at Cabrillo and Point Dume, back when we called them that. So it's really great to be here with you guys in Malibu, and I'm here with my colleague, Veronica Mendez.
Hi guys, I'm Veronica. I'm so excited to be here with this team. I know you guys are doing great things. I am a child and family therapist at Family Services Santa Monica, and I work with kids in the Santa Monica and Malibu Unified School District, and I'm one of the lead trainers for Innovations 2 for Trauma and Resiliency.
So, yeah, welcome. And we just want to take a moment to set the tone. So we're going to be inviting some participation from you guys. We're a small enough group where we can actually use just video hands. Or if you'd like, you can also use the participant screen. And if you open up your participant panel, at the bottom, there is a raise hand button. So here, I'll show you on mine. And like that, there's a raised hand. Maybe, I don't know if the rest of you can see it, but at least I can see it on my hand. That being said, if you guys wouldn't mind keeping yourselves on mute, if you do have questions, please take yourselves off of mute, all that good Zoom etiquette that we've all gotten so good at. That being said, tech aside, we're going to be talking about some potentially activating material today. So we're going to be talking about stress, we're going to be talking about trauma, but we're also going to be talking about resiliency. And part of resiliency is taking care of yourselves. So please, during this presentation, we want you to be here. We want you to keep your cameras on. We want you to participate, but we really want you guys to take care of yourselves. So if you need to take a break and turn off your camera for a second, if you need to turn off your camera and stretch and eat and listen so you can absorb the material, then please do that. Please have compassion for yourselves, all right? And part of having compassion is really celebrating the wins, right? Celebrating what has been going well for you guys as people who work with children, as just people, as people. So we would love to see in the chat, maybe what are some good things? What are some wins that you've had maybe over the last week or beyond? I like to see people really thinking about this. Oh, good transitions. Ooh, especially from in-person to in-person preschool. Awesome. Transitions
I
are
love
tough.
that. That's a huge win. I think putting myself first. I love that. Yes. And that takes so much work too, especially during this time. Thank you, Sujin, for that.
Maybe we'll
Sorry to interrupt. Jasmine, do we have the whole staff on the call? I'm really confused right now because I'm not seeing everyone. I'm not seeing Ashlyn. I don't know that Tyler's present. And I want to maximize this time and everyone needs to be on this call.
I'm here.
Okay, are you able to come up? Are you able to participate?
In what, can you see me?
No. Can anyone?
Yeah, we can see her from our end.
Okay, maybe it's just my screen. Do we have everyone, Jasmine?
Yeah, so the program staff are all on one account. They're all under me. Tyler is here. She had to go take care of something with one of the kids.
Okay, understood. I understand you guys have kids.
Yeah, and Violet is the same situation, but other than that, we're all in here.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you so much for, we all have to handle things, and that's what we're inviting here, right? I mean, we've got to wear a lot of different hats.
Amen to that.
Yeah. So I'm loving playing with our kids.
And seeing them engaged.
Yeah, because that's not easy, especially over virtual. And really being curious and exploring what's going on with kids. Yeah.
I love it.
Oh, and seeing some smiling faces. Love all of that. So thank you. Oh, and one more.
Making progress with
Oh,
kids.
making progress.
Yeah, who haven't had any schooling so far this semester. This is great. Thank you so much. I mean, I think that these are such huge wins, and I love kind of the idea that you guys seem really reflective and open um, during this really difficult time. So thank you guys. Um,
So, yep, go for it,
yeah,
Vero.
I'm gonna go for it. So I think we are working with kids in person. Great. That's good to know because we do have a little bit of a virtual session because we thought it was a hybrid model, but we don't have to go over that. So today, these are some of our objectives. We really want to give an in-depth overview of trauma and stress. We know that trauma is kind of like this huge buzzword, but we really want to break it down and what that means, especially for our kids. And then resiliency. Again, another big buzzword. What is resiliency? But more importantly, how do we build that in our community? We know that Malibu already has so many strengths, and so we kind of want to help you guys build on that and highlight some of the stuff that you might already be doing that you might not know is building resiliency. And then fostering connections, I think, is really important too, especially during these times because everyone has so much things going on. Like Alex and Casey said, we're wearing so many hats, and sometimes it's difficult to build connections during this time.
Absolutely. So let's just like jump right into it, right? We're talking about trauma and stress, but really to talk about trauma, first we got to talk about stress.
Yes.
And anyone here ever feel stressed out ever in their lives? Maybe even this morning, right? I mean, I know that I'm even feeling some stress right now because I'm giving a presentation. Vera, I imagine you're feeling the same thing, right? So
I
stress
am.
isn't necessarily bad, right? And we're going to jump into that. Stress is a mental or emotional tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances, right? So stress can be positive, right? It's growing pains. It leads to growth and is essential for healthy development. And that goes for kids, that goes for adults too, right? So, but in kids, well, what do we mean when we say positive stress? Brief disagreements, right? Really learning some social skills. Deadlines, I think kids and adults equally, right? Like I know that I need some deadlines to get things done. The stress from deadlines helps keep me productive. It helps keep me in line. Morning and evening routines. I mean, at least as far as morning routines go, I think this is true for adults and for kids. It's like getting that cup of coffee, getting the sandwich packed, making sure you got all your stuff and getting out the door. There's some stress there, but it's also keeping us in the places where we need to be and in the mode that we need to be in to support what our goals are. And then we move it into tolerable stress, right? So this is maybe more intense kinds of stressors. They're temporary, but they require some amount of support for growth. So in middle schoolers and high schoolers, that might look like social conflict, like more intense social conflict, right? How do we navigate complex social situations? And we maybe need to talk with a caring adult about how do we navigate that. Maybe we need some friends. How do we navigate these complex situations? Life transitions are another big one. Family changes, so that could look like a new baby in the family. That could look like divorce, right? These are stressful events, and they require some support to grow from them. School changes are another one that we think about when we think of tolerable stress. Traditionally, we'd think like, okay, maybe we're moving schools or maybe we're like moving upgrades. Well, now school has changed on us. So that kind of stressor. What kind of support do kids need? What kind of support do adults and educators need to make that tolerable and a chance for a growing opportunity? Then we're moving into toxic stress. Toxic stress is prolonged stress and maybe without sufficient support. And when we don't have sufficient support in a stressful situation, often we learn unhelpful coping strategies. We adapt in ways that maybe aren't going to support us in the long run. So things that could be financial stressors, natural disasters like the Woolsey fire, or systemic discrimination. And when I say systemic discrimination. It's all the isms and basically all the phobias, right? So racism, classism, sexism, gender discrimination, and homophobia, transphobia. We'll be getting into more of the systemic stuff a little bit later.
I do want to just highlight, Alex, that in these types of stresses, in the different types of stress, support is what seems to be playing the biggest role, right? And if you think of your own experience, I'm sure that when you go through a stressful event, it makes a big difference when someone's there to support you. And so I just really want to highlight, because I think that support is what seems to be the difference between tolerable and toxic stress.
Thank you, Vero. Yeah, and so maybe let's talk a little bit about skipping slides, come back. There we go. Let's talk about just like the world we're living in right now. We've got a whole lot of stress. We have stress from COVID. We have stress from systemic racism that's really being shown, and we're having these complex, important conversations about racism in America, especially anti-Blackness. But when it comes to COVID, we're living with a lot of isolation and fear of the unknown. So there's stress there. And we're living in a time of economic instability related to the pandemic. And when we're talking about the pandemic, when we're talking about systemic racism, what we're really talking about, what kind of stress is this? Is this a tolerable stress where we have sufficient support, or is this a toxic stress where we don't have sufficient support? So when you are a Black, Indigenous person of color, the world is not built for us, right? It is built to oppress us. And oppression is one of these stressors that we live with and live through. And when we pile on all these different stressors, we become more susceptible to trauma because the more stress you have, the more support you need. And if we don't have enough support, well, then that's where stress becomes toxic and potentially traumatic. So on that note, Vero, let's talk a little bit about like, how does stress impact us?
Okay, thank you so much. Do you mind going to our next slide? Great.
Yeah.
The window of tolerance. So I really love this, and this is one of like the key takeaways, I think, from what we're going to talk about today. The window of tolerance is when, if you see the little picture, there's like a beach and a palm tree. A window of tolerance is when we are so relaxed, we're chill. Anything that can happen comes our way, we take in stride. We are really having a great time, right? And so we want to talk about what right now and during these times when we're all stressed out from the pandemic, from current events. We're all under a lot of stress right now, and we have to keep taking care of ourselves so that our window stays open, right? Because different things open and close that window. Different stressors close that window, right? So we want to name this so you can use it as a tool for yourself as to when you're in your window of tolerance and when you're not. So let's talk about a little bit about when you're out of your window of tolerance. There's different reactions, right? I'm personally a hyper, which is when you leave the window of tolerance, you become hyper aroused. So anxious, a lot of energy, angry, like I need to do things. I'm very reactive, right? Hypo is a little different. It's like when you kind of lose energy, you're zoned down, you're not really processing information, you kind of want to be left alone. That's what hypo looks like.
Yeah, and I think like I'm often a hypo person, but any person can be both, maybe, but your default might be one or the other. So my default certainly is hypo, but I certainly have been hyper aroused in my life too.
Right, and so I'm wondering right now, we want to do a little exercise. If you guys can think in your chat, and put in the chat whether you're hyper or hypo and what that might look like. So I could put something like, I get really anxious when I'm outside of my window of tolerance, and I get really fidgety. So we want to hear from you guys, like, what does it look like when you're out of your window of tolerance? Are you hyper or are you hypo?
Yeah, like what happens when you're stressed out, right? What is your default reaction to that stress? And an answer only if you feel like comfortable doing so, but it's like a chance to really think like, what happens to me?
Hyper, I feel you. Yes. And sometimes it can be a mixture of both. I've heard from a lot of people that they can do both.
Okay.
Hyper.
Another hyper. We got some mixed people in there. Oh, 100% hyper. All right. I love that. Oh, and we got a hypo. Welcome to Camp Hypo along with me.
Welcome to Hypo. I like that. Welcome to Camp Hypo. Yes, and so thank you so much for sharing, you guys. The reason why we want to point this out is because it's really important to start to recognize when you are out of your window of tolerance, because that's going to play a very big role in what we're going to talk about today, right? And learning to expand that window of tolerance. What are some things that you can do to expand your window of tolerance? And I think one of the other things is that sometimes we don't have to react when we're outside of our window. We can give ourselves time to be like, I'm going to come back to this actually. And Alex, you want to lead us into trauma and how this relates to trauma?
Right. Like, so let's really get into it, right? So we're talking about stress. We're talking, and sorry, I'm like moving all these windows around so I can see what is going on my screen, because I want to see all your great chats, but I also want to be able to read what is going on here. There we go. All right. So what is trauma, right? We've been talking about stress, right? Well, the stress is really important because it helps explain what might become trauma. And trauma, and we really want to highlight this, is not an event, right? Trauma is how we organize around a situation that provokes intense fear and a sense of danger. So it's how we organize around really stressful, toxically stressful events. But also that trauma actually is a pretty amazing thing. And thank God we have traumatic reactions, because trauma is not a flaw or a weakness. It's a highly effective tool of safety and survival, right? It's maybe what's going to get us through, that toxic stress so that we stay safe. Vera, is there anything you want to add to this one?
There is actually, yes. I really just want to talk about how trauma isn't an event, because when trauma is used as a buzzword, it's like, oh yeah, that was really traumatic. That was a really traumatic event. They went through this. But really, Alex and I can go through the same event, and it could be traumatic for Alex and it cannot be traumatic for me. Because again, trauma is a response. It's the way our mind and body organizes around that response, right? And so I just really want to highlight that because it's a key thing. And then I do want to go back later on to the tools of survival and safety, which we'll talk about now later on, and how it relates to the kids that you guys are seeing.
Yeah, so let's just really talk about, what are some of these really stressful events, right? So these are potentially tolerable, potentially toxic, but potentially traumatic events, right? They're all stressors. So we might talk about one-time events. So accident or injury, witnessing some sort of violence or being victim of some sort of violence, losing a loved one or a job, or a natural disaster like the Woolsey Fire. But while we're looking at all these boxes, let's just take a moment to remember that life cannot be put into boxes, right? So this is really much more like a Venn diagram, and things are overlapping. I know that for the families I worked with who went through the Woolsey Fire, it wasn't just the fire itself, but it was all of the ongoing relentless stress that came after the fire, right? It was dealing with the insurance. It was dealing with trying to find a new home. It was, just like all the stress and the ongoing stress that went along with the fire, right? And I think that, all these ongoing relentless stressors that we have in this box, well, they also interact with these other boxes that are in here. So living in poverty or unsafe neighborhoods, chronic illnesses, homelessness, intimate partner violence, abuse and neglect, all of those interact with the systems that are in this world. So just like we were talking about earlier, racism, sexism, homophobia, race-based violence, community violence, medical trauma, school violence and bullying. And that's maybe one that's worth pausing on just for a moment, right? Bullying is a tolerable stress if a kid has support around it, right? So caring adults who are there to be like, okay, we see that you're getting bullied, we're intervening, and we're going to help you navigate the situation. It becomes toxic and potentially traumatic if they don't have those supports there, if they don't have those caring adults. The other thing is causes often overlooked. It's really anything that involves shame. So humiliating or disappointing experiences, harsh or cruel treatment. And this was an easy one to overlook because it's one that we so often keep hidden, right? When we feel shame, we hide it from the world. So it's one that's harder to see. It's also one that maybe is worth talking to, if you have questions about that, talking to Randy or someone else at the wellness center. So on that note, let's actually talk about, okay, what are we looking for? What are some invitations to reconsider what's going on? And what's an invitation to consult, right? So what are the signs and the symptoms of trauma that you guys might see as people who work with kiddos? Well, so what are the signs? What are the adaptations that these kiddos have, right, to deal with the toxic stress that has maybe become traumatic? Well, kids often can't stop thinking about it, playing about it, or talking about it. And that's also true for adults, by the way. Maybe they have uncontrollable worries. But also the other things that are going on this list, and this is a really truncated, abbreviated list that we got so that you guys could still read what's, what to look out for. Any one of these things is not that big a deal, right? Like I had trouble with like sleeping the other day. It's like, do I need to see a therapist say like maybe I have trauma? No, right? Oh, you have a moody teenager who's isolating? Like that's maybe developmentally appropriate. But when we see a bunch of these different ones layered on top of each other with a event that is potentially traumatic, that's when we start thinking like, I wonder what's really going on here. Maybe it's a time to think about, is it an opportunity for more compassion about like understanding what's going on? And is this an opportunity to talk to Randy or Peggy about what's going on too?
Alex, I'm going to ask you to read them through really quickly.
Really quick. Okay, let's go. So let's go through all of them. Yeah. So feelings, right? Feelings that we want to look through. Difficulty being with feelings and mood swings. So fear, sadness, anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, anger, disconnection.
And we see big ups and downs, emotional ups and downs with a lot of kids.
Yeah. Or maybe we'll see like hypoarousal and it's just like they're like barely there, right? They're just like absent. In the body, the thing that we often see, especially with kiddos, frequent stomach or headaches or some sort of unexplained pain. It's like that kid who always needs to go to the nurse's office, right?
Yes.
Kids often somaticize their pain. I mean, adults do too, but I think we really see it with kids. Again, the difficulty sleeping, and then behaviors. So regressing and not progressing. Kids who maybe become clingy or start wetting the bed again. Maybe they have a little bit harder time to drop off. Isolating and withdrawing from others. This also could look like not just isolating from friends and from adults, but also maybe just not finding any pleasure in things that they used to find to be fun. Avoidance is a really big one. And depending on the kid, it's going to be super obvious, or it might be a little bit harder to tease out. That they just like do not want to be around any reminder of something that reminds them of the traumatic event or the toxic stress. The other thing that we see about, and this is something that's really important to keep, poor impulse control is a huge sign of trauma. So aggression, hyperactivity, self-destructive behavior, trouble concentrating. Kids, especially young men of color, get labeled as ADHD at rates many times higher than their white female counterparts, because that's often how boys show that they've gone through some kind of stress. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. And just one thing that I want to talk about this slide is, if we go back to the original, one of the original definitions of trauma is that trauma is not a flaw or a weakness. Trauma is a response, right? And it's actually a highly effective tool of safety and survival. So if we look at these symptoms, right, these actually served a purpose in that moment of trauma and trying to survive something. It actually helped them survive and feel safe in that moment. And it's when those behaviors are still being engaged in, and those like kind of maladaptive coping skills are still being used in a different setting where the kid it doesn't necessarily serve them. It could be counterproductive, right? And we see that a lot in school and in after school programs, right? So something that might help a kid stay safe in an after school program looks like a behavior. And so we just want to reframe that, because if you think back to how these tools help them be safe and secure, they can become counterproductive. And that's when we really want to reconsider and consult and also look for it. And we have to be pretty well, we have to be really present to be able to look for that.
Yeah, so really being in our window of tolerance, right? Really taking care of
Exactly.
ourselves so we can take care of others. So we would love to hear what you guys are seeing in your programs, but also take this moment to like invite some questions about stress, about trauma, about anything else that maybe we want to keep in the back of our heads while we move through this presentation. If you guys want to if you're going to your participant window and click raise your hand, you're welcome to do that. We're small enough that I'll probably catch you if you raise your hand, just like virtual or like on video, whatever works for you. Yeah, this is a moment to share what's going on and to ask any questions you might have. Ethan, is that a question over in your group?
Sorry, you're asking me if I have a question?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I don't have a question. Are you asking us to share some of the things that we've been experiencing in our programs?
Yes.
Questions or just, anything that's been going on with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I speak for everyone. A lot of difficulty with like attention, what you're describing is like attention deficit, which is probably related to the trauma that's going on, and a transition to a completely different type of school.
Ethan, what about a parent taking out their personal stress on you?
Yeah, that has been happening recently. Not the most fun in the world.
I also see the parents kind of like so scattered right now. Like we're constantly asking them to help us, to support their kids. And it almost feels like everything's falling on us.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, I think that's kind of what we're talking about, is having to take care of yourselves, because you kind of are the container and you guys are the buffers, not just for the kids, but for the parents. As they go through kind of like everyone seems to be out of their window.
Yeah, and this is interesting. This is, I think, difficulty with difficult parents is the thing that we probably hear is like the biggest challenge for people who work with kids consistently. It doesn't really matter the role. I mean, I hear from therapists all the time, right? Like, I love working with the kids, but like the parents, that's my biggest challenge. So if something looks, so we borrowed part of the definition for trauma from Resmaa Menakem, who is this incredible somatic therapist. He writes really beautifully about race and trauma. But one of the things that I think is really helpful when we're trying to have a compassionate stance and to really understand what is going on is that if it is hysterical, it's probably historical, which is to say, if like something just seems like this is an outsized reaction to what the situation is on hand, right? If something just doesn't quite make sense, well, then probably there is some sort of historical aspect to it. Maybe that there is some sort of family trauma, there's some past trauma, there's some past experience that this parent had that is then, or maybe it's, this doesn't just apply to our work, right? This also could apply to our lives. If someone's having an outsized experience and sort of like putting it on us, then maybe there's something else that happened in the past.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I also just want to really read from the chat too. The teens feel isolated and English learners are not feeling supported academically due to language barriers. Yeah. I think for me too, I've also seen a lot of regression with some kids. Some kids are thriving during the virtual world, but some kids are really not. And it creates so much more stress for them. And so kind of seeing that too. Because we've taken in so many ways, so many of the supports, the live in-person supports are gone. And that can make something that was stressful being chronically stressful or even traumatic for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think this is a really good moment to consider like how systemic barriers are really being brought to light during this time, right? So we have English language learners, maybe. I mean, I remember when I was a therapist up in Malibu, we didn't really have enough attention paid to differences in class, in
Mm.
between kids. Um, so there's, I worked with kids who lived in mansions. I worked with kids who, didn't really know where they were going to sleep that night. And I don't think Malibu really gets enough attention and credit to the struggles that their
Yeah.
kids face. So I think it's amazing that you guys are really being there and being conscious of what it is that's going on with your kids.
And I
So,
think also, just really
yeah.
quickly, Alex, going back to the window of tolerance and how I'm hearing that you guys really are containing so much for these families, right? But we also want to recognize that, like, you guys might be going through something traumatic, right? You might be having a traumatic response. This is your community, right? So you might be out of your window of tolerance because you are helping co-regulate these families, but when you yourself are having all these responses, right? There's definitely been times in the room where my client is saying something and they might be saying something in a monotone voice, and my body's like, there's alarm bells going off everywhere, and I have to constantly really slow things down to be able to be present, and then after the session's over, take care of myself, because it's really hard to co-regulate and be that container for people if we're going through the same stressors. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe that brings us, Vero, to like the next slide, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about, what do we do in these? Oh, skipped again. All right, what do we do in these situations?
Yes, thank you. So I think also this is the power of curiosity and perspective isn't just for our kids, by the way, and the families that we serve. This is so much, it's so easy for us to do things for others, but very hard to do it for ourselves. So when we talk about the power of curiosity and perspective, it's also for ourselves, right? We want to really slow things down and understand that our baseline and our family's baseline is not the same as it was last year, right? And that's okay. Our baselines have shifted. And so by really slowing things down, we have the power of curiosity. We can see things from a different point of view. We're non-judgmental. And so what that means is, instead of saying, oh, like, I'm going to use that example of me being in the room being like, oh my God, why am I feeling this way? What's going on? My alarm bells, just kind of being like, huh, that's interesting. I'm having all these reactions. So just being kind of chill about it. That's curiosity, and understanding that, all things are on a continuum. Our feelings, our children's feelings, are not good and bad. It's on a spectrum. And what this means is that, really, I like to say, it's not about feeling good. It's about getting good at feeling. And that's really uncomfortable, because I don't really particularly like getting good at feeling my anxiety or my stress. But it really is so important, especially during this time. And yeah. And I think the last thing that I want to say about this is, again, going back to the window of tolerance, it's really difficult to be curious with ourselves or with our children and families if we are outside of our window. So I really want to encourage you guys to start being curious as to what closes your window, what opens your window, or just being curious of, like, maybe I don't need to respond to this right now. I'll wait for me to come back into my window to have a response.
Right. So maybe we could work this muscle a little bit right now, right? We already had some maybe good connections around some of the inattention, but I don't know. I'm wondering what's behind some of these behaviors we see, right? And we've got a whole list of the things that we all struggle with when it comes to kids' behaviors. But if you also want to invite some parental behaviors to this list, you're totally welcome. When kids are out of control or defiant or disrespectful, oppositional, disruptive, I'm wondering, what do you think is going on in your kids' lives? What are they trying to say to us? And so you're welcome to unmute yourselves, raise your hand. I wonder if you have any good maybe connections about what's going on at home or just within the kids themselves that might explain some of these left-hand labels of behaviors that we often see. All right, Randy.
So for some families, when they're at night, when they're at home, the houses might be chaotic or not structured, and sort of really a lot of things aren't in place, and then they're asked to come back to a structured program to be able to be in that structured program and to find their footing. So I think it's hard for some kids to be able to regulate themselves in the morning, to be able to put themselves back into that structure. I think we're seeing that with a couple of, our families that, if their houses don't have the structure, don't have normal bedtimes, dinner times, then I think kids are struggling when they come
Yeah,
back.
so they might be looking like a little out of control or disruptive, right? If that's going on.
Yeah, they're disruptive. They're angry, or they can't pay attention, and they're
Yeah.
hungry. They're hungry all the time. They want to get up for breaks. I would imagine that just sort of creates a chaos for them inside of them that they can't express.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see some things on the chat, Alex, so I'm going to read them out
Please,
loud.
yeah.
Fear regarding future and uncertainty. I have seen this so much, and especially during the protests. I had a couple of kids that their physical body, they were like having meltdowns, and because they were so scared, they didn't understand what was going on, and they needed to be contained. So thank you for that. And like, again, future and uncertainty is a very difficult feeling for us to navigate as adults. I can't imagine for our children what that looks like. And Peggy wrote, they lack a feeling of belonging and love. Yeah, thanks, Peggy. And I also think a little bit about the unseen potential traumatic experience of shame and being humiliated, and how that often goes unsaid. But kids really feel that, and they constantly need to be reassured. And if they don't feel a sense of belonging and love, they feel like they've done something wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys so much for all of your experience and and being so generous in sharing your experience. Here are some things that we have seen, just not being included in social activities, whether that's virtual or in person. I think, like we've already said, missing friends. I think that we're also potentially seeing a lot more family conflict because we're all stuck together, and how are kids reacting to that? And I mean, economic insecurity, certainly. Fear just about what would happen if someone got sick in their household. What if someone gets COVID? Being really worried about death. As Veronica was saying, the uprising and the protests, how kids are reacting to that. And then there's also just like the day in, day out of working with kids, and like them being worried about like just succeeding academically, right? Not understanding things, not knowing how to ask for help, all of that good stuff. That's all of those things that used to exist still exist, right? And I'm sure you're seeing them too. So we're talking about all these ways that they're reacting, right? All these ways that they're adapting to these stressors, right? And we've like mentioned a couple times, like, how do we be that support? How do we be that buffer? Why is that so important? Well, that is so important because you guys are already doing so much to help keep kids resilient, right? Keeping those, like all that negative stuff, well, turning those into positive outcomes. And just to remind us, stress, right? Positive stress leads to growth and is essential for healthy development. Tolerable stress, same thing, right? But it really requires support for growth, right? And we were trying to keep things in the yellow and the green so that it doesn't turn to red, right? And that's where resilience comes in. So the ability so what is resilience, right? It is the ability to effectively cope with, adapt to, and overcome adversity, stress, and challenging experiences, right? I mean, that goes for adults too, right? We could all use a little resilience. So the stress is so important to think about, right? When we keep the stress, when we're able to find the supports to keep our windows open, that window is our resilience. The wider our window is, the more we're able to open our window. That is resilience, right? Yeah, Vera, do you want to add to anything to this one?
About resiliency? Well, just
Yeah.
kind of, I'm thinking a lot about what you guys said about parents being difficult. And I also just want to say that I'm thinking like, if our parents can't react and can't slow down right now because there's so much going on for them, just in a way, the important role that you guys play for those kids and how in many ways you're helping them build the resilience and they might not have it somewhere else. In terms of like, it's that muscle of helping them navigate with stress and really, and I want to get into, if you could go to the next slide, Alex, but I really want to just say the next one, yeah, that it really is about connection more than anything. And this can be really freeing because it means that you don't have to control this kid's behaviors, but you can just connect with them. And that in and of itself is so healing. Do you want to read this quote, Alex?
Yeah, sure. So I think Pam Leo says it so well. Either we spend time meeting with children's emotional needs by filling up their cup with love, or we spend time dealing with the behaviors caused from their unmet needs. Either way, we're spending the time, right? So this is really to say that you are the medicine that kids need, right? My favorite part of my job, and I don't care if it's working with adults, with kids, with parents, right, is praising them, is showing them love, right? Because I feel so good giving that to others, right? How good does it say you're doing a great job, right? How good does it feel to say like, I see you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it, Vera.
Well, again, I also want to talk about how important filling your own cup, which is what we started with, especially because I want to acknowledge that you guys are probably going through a lot too. So just filling yourself that cup. If you reacted from a place where you weren't like, curious and perspective and doing all this stuff that we're throwing at you, fill your cup by love and say, that's okay. You can do it tomorrow. You can do it another day, right? And then again, with our parents, about the difficult parents, I really relate to that. And just kind of going back to what Alex said about praise, like no one is telling these parents that it's okay that their baseline is off, right? And so kind of just filling that cup too, which leads to relationships, and really kind of like the thick of resiliency, which is, it's all about relationships, right? And it's connection versus expectations. And it's the difference between a negative or positive impact during a stressful event is if there's someone there to support and create a buffer in an appropriate way, which can be both for parents or for children, right? And you guys, you can combine everything you know in your community, and as providers to foster healthy, safe, positive relationships and thus resiliency. And what this really means is slowing things down for you, for kids, for their parents, and just being present and connecting in whatever way you can. Alex, do you want to show the next slide?
Sure.
Really quickly, I love this quote. It's one of my favorites, which is, showing up, being present in the moment, and helping someone feel seen, safe, and soothed. That's my North Star. That is always the answer, by Dr. Tina Payne Bryson. And I think that as providers, where we see these families, this can be really freeing again, right? We don't have to do that much. I know that sometimes it feels like we have to fix this, we have to make sure that is done, but really being present in the moment does so much and can be so healing, for everyone involved.
So, Vero, you wanna tell us how to do some of that healing?
Sure.
Let's get to it.
Okay, so I really like this, the 4 S's, right? Safe, seen, soothed, and secure. If we can have one of our kids, one of our parents, or even ourselves, or even our coworkers feel some of this once a day, we're just winning at life, really. So safe, I want to acknowledge that a lot of our kids don't feel emotional or physically safe at home. And so coming to your program is where is the only place that they might feel emotionally and physically safe. And then kind of going with what Randy said, safety, routine, stability, and consistency creates a sense of safety. I have so many parents that come and are like, I don't understand, my kid does so well in school and then he gets home and he's off the walls. And I'm like, well, are there boundaries? Are there rules? Are there structure? Because these serve a purpose. They're emotionally containing for our kids. Being seen, I think that, again, feelings supportive versus expectation, right? Just kind of really being there and having our kids feel empowered that they also have small wins. Our parents also have small wins. And feeling soothed. I think that this also, just want to touch base upon how, again, we need to be regulated in order to help co-regulate the parents that come in or the kids that come in, and the window of tolerance and how that plays. But we really play a role in having these families feel co-regulated, whether we want to or not. And this is important because, especially with our kids, when they feel soothed or when they feel secure, emotionally secure, they can have a positive experience of them sharing their feelings, their fears, their inner world with us, and we're open, they will come back to us. Especially the little ones, because the little ones are off. I hear so much from my teens and from the little ones that they feel they don't have a sense of power or control over their lives, and that their fears and their inner worlds are not taken seriously. And we could do that for them. Yeah, anything you want to add about this slide?
Yeah, I mean, I think the scene one, I think, is so important because it sort of it brings in all the others. Approaching someone from a place of compassion is so important, right? Compassion is that I see that you suffer and I care, right? And it's a little bit different than empathy. Empathy is like, you ever like watch a pratfall and like feel it, right? Like you watch someone stub their tongue, you're like, ooh, ow, right? Compassion's a little bit different. Like, it's not like we're feeling what someone else is feeling, but we're observing it. Like, I see that you suffer and I care and I am here with it. I'm allowing you to feel whatever it is that you're feeling. And I'm just going to be here and acknowledge that how painful that is. And that can be really hard for adults, especially working with kids, especially for parents, right?
Yeah.
I think so quickly we go into this fixing mode. Like, oh, you're unhappy? Well, let's do something, right? Sometimes the most powerful thing is just to be, just to see. And the seeing will do the soothing, right? Just seeing where they're at, seeing what their situation is, that'll go a long way to soothing, and that'll go a long way to feeling safe and secure, because they'll know that their emotions are okay and it's safe to have their emotions with you. So it's an invitation just to be with yourselves so that you can open your window enough to have the compassion to see what's going on with someone else. In doing that, it opens their window.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I just want to think the whole idea of being with, and I know we're running out of time, but I see all you guys sitting in a room together, and I know that being a therapist that works with a lot of therapists, like when I have a bad session, the kitchen is our safe space, and just being with each other and like crying it out, or being like, oh my God, can you sit with me while I eat my feelings because that was a horrible session and this parent just like screamed at me for 45 minutes. So that sense of like being with each other, it's what feels the best, right? And how can we do that for our parents and our kids?
So we've got about 5 minutes left. I don't know how hard you guys want to end this. I also don't really know how much. Do you guys want to do the virtual like do's and don'ts, or would you like to save some time for questions? What makes sense for you guys?
It sounds like they're not doing virtual stuff.
Right. So Randy, I'll sort of turn it to you because your camera's on. What would you like us to do? Would you like us to do the virtual?
We're doing virtual. I mean,
okay.
Oh, okay.
Virtual, but I think questions probably, if people have.
Yeah, let's do questions.
Let's do questions.
Because I think if people talk about, what's going on in their
And
program.
I'm pretty sure you guys will get a copy of this PowerPoint, so you'll get like the do's and don'ts there.
Great. So any questions, thoughts, feedback, reflections? Like, we really want to hear from you guys. We want to be with you.
I guess the thought I had about virtual was maybe helping the students feel more secure about being on virtual. I don't necessarily what to say sometimes, like how to make them more calmer, like, or taking breaks, or, but I guess this is more related to the staff, but it's both ways.
Sure. I guess for us, like, virtual's tough. We don't try to force anyone to do on camera because it's just so easy to get into a power struggle. Really what we're trying to do is enroll kids to want to be on camera. And the way we do that is we give a lot of choices, right? If you have choices, you feel like you're free. So you feel like you can log on or like turn on your camera if you want. Having that sense of empowerment really is a big help.
Yeah.
Also, like, we don't know what's going on at home. There might be really good reasons for them to not want to turn on that camera, right?
Remember, these kids are in school every day. They come to a program where they're in school. So
Yeah.
we're supervising them going to school.
Oh, so they still don't want to be on camera, right?
Well, they say they have to be. That's the thing. I mean, sometimes their teachers let them turn off their cameras, right, Ethan?
Yeah. So I guess
Sorry, what is the question? The question is, how can we support them getting on
Yeah, so
virtually?
the students that are coming to us, we're supervising them in their learning, their virtual learning in the
Got
classroom.
it.
So they're coming to us so that we can support them. Some of them don't have internet, some of them just don't have the ways and means to be able to be, so we have them at our program every day.
Yeah, I think choices is really, I've worked with a lot of my kids that with choices, and obviously they don't have a choice to be on virtual school, but how can they find choices and empowerment during the class, right? So one of the girls that I was working with, she has a lot of social anxiety, but she really feels disconnected. And so she wants to connect with her peers. And so I'm like, okay, how can we build a menu of choices within that classroom that you feel comfortable with? And she takes the lead on it. So she'll be like, okay, I can maybe share one thing. And that was one option. Okay, what else could you do? Maybe I can stay on during recess, and letting her take the lead on it, and we're collaborating, and then having a menu of choices within what is really doable.
Yeah, and I guess this is the other thing is, like, this is just an opportunity to learn how to be with feelings for kids, right? There's a lot of kids who are just like, I feel so much anxiety about being on camera, right?
Yeah.
And, well, yeah, you do feel that anxiety, right? Okay, what does that anxiety feel like? Where in your body do you feel it, right? Getting curious, helping them get curious about this anxiety. Is there a belief attached with that anxiety? Okay, is that belief true, right? Really getting curious and walking them through it. I mean, like, there's some times where it's like, you've got 5 minutes to get on. So having a moment where you have time to have space to get curious about it, right? To invite curiosity about it. And maybe there's, like, depending on your kid, it's like having some, like, contained, appropriate self-disclosure. I know when I feel anxious, I really feel it in my chest. I know that my muscles get tight right here. I know that I talk a little bit faster. I notice that my heart rate goes up, right? Okay, well, what then helps that? Okay, maybe I do some deep breathing. Maybe I have some sort of, like, fidget thing on my desk. What's gonna help me so that I can just be with whatever's going on? And that's actually pretty amazing, right? Because if you have kids that know that they can be with big feelings, well, you're building their capacity, you're growing their capacity to know that they can handle anything else that comes their way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a question, but I just have an observation and experience that I've had here that kind of plays into this element of giving them a choice. So as Randy said, we're basically facilitating their distance learning experiences here at the club. And, these kids have a lot of different needs with their classes. So it can be really frustrating when one of them will require a particular amount of time, like, because, we have so many kids that we need to help. So for me, I have one kid who in his homework, he likes to change the fonts on his homework. And it can be so frustrating when I'm trying to get through this math problem and he's like, oh no, but I got to change the font on all of the things. And what I figured out is, even though that's so frustrating, I have to kind of hold the brakes on my resistance and just say, okay, if that helps you get through the math assignment, then, it is worth it. So it can be frustrating for me, but I think the choice, what you're saying, it really does help them when you give them that little bit of fun or whatever they want to call it.
And what do you think is going on for him when he wants to change the font? Like, what do you think?
He's on the spectrum and he just has particular things that he likes on it. So that's what it is.
Yeah.
Excellent noticing. Also, I think I was that kid who wanted to change his fonts all the time. So I think it's
I was
amazing.
going to say that. I was going to say Alex is going to relate to this so much.
So as that kid, I really thank you for not getting into that power struggle and just like recognizing where the kid is at, right? It's not interfering with the learning, and yeah, it's taking some time, so that can be frustrating. And I think just working with kids on the spectrum, period, my stepbrother's on the spectrum, there's just things that like they do, it's how they need to do it, and it's a real opportunity to have compassion for that in a way that's also having compassion for yourself, because you can just be like, oh my God, do we really have to walk through the store 3 times? Yes, we do.
And I also think I just want to point out that you are being present for that kid, right? But being present requires so much work. It requires slowing things down, being like, don't react, don't react, don't react. I'm just going to be here. And so being present seems so easy. And it, again, it's like a buzz phrase, but it's so active. We have to be so proactive about it. And it really takes a lot for us to slow things down and being like, okay, this is what we're doing. Okay.
How
Veronica and Alex, I just want to be mindful of your time because we
Yeah.
are over and our time. But I know that everyone has a lot of questions. What would be the best way to perhaps utilize you guys as a resource from this training if they have more questions? I know I see that someone has their hand up as well. I don't know if maybe that'll be the
Oh,
last
sorry.
question.
Yes, we did start a little bit late. I don't know what you guys are, but I'm okay staying a little bit longer. Alex, are you?
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. I mean, also, like, you guys, I mean, we're happy to be a resource for you right now. You guys have this amazing resource, like, accessible. I don't want to, like, put more work on Randy or Peggy, but you guys also have people with you, too. So it's sometimes knowing, as we're talking about opening our windows, it's also knowing what sources we have. If you guys have questions after that, I'm happy to put my email address into the chat.
Yeah.
Here, I'll do that now, or maybe, and Randy and Peggy, feel free to share it too. Oh, well.
I'm gonna ask. Someone had a question. Who raised their hand? Jen?
It was me,
Yes.
I think.
What's going on?
I think so,
Yes.
yeah. I'm Jessica, by the way.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you guys for doing this. So I am subcontracted through Boys and Girls Club, and we've been working on a mental health and wellness course, and we also have one coming out about alliance and how to be an ally, and we had a team meeting yesterday. We were talking about this training today, so I kind of wanted to relay my team's questions. Some of them are on here right now. This is kind of a layered one. You answered it a little bit, but we've been doing these pilot courses. We're on our 3rd one. It hasn't started yet. And they're 8 weeks. And the first one was at the beginning of quarantine. And because we're talking about mental health already, it's, sensitive subject matter. And we've definitely noticed from our first pilot course to the second, just the lack of, I don't want to say interest, but participation. Like our kids really just seem totally zoned out on the Zooms. And it's hard because we want to hear what's going on, but we don't want to put people on the spot. So that's also what we were talking about yesterday with this allyship program we have going on. Obviously, we want to talk about everything that's happening right now in the world and within our kids' worlds. And it's just hard because you don't want to pressure anyone, but you want them to feel like they can talk. And it's hard to not give feedback when they don't say anything.
Yeah.
Yes. Alex?
Sure.
You wanna go over that?
I think this is a tough one that you're talking about, right? Like I've had a really hard time engaging my kids virtually. In fact, like I've started seeing some of them socially distanced because it's just, I think when you got some ADHD boys, that's what's called for. Yeah. That being said, right? Both acknowledging that it's difficult, right? And how that's frustrating for us as providers, but also how do we create safe spaces that are virtual? We know that kids respond to virtual spaces and feel safe in them because they do it all the time. Right? Think about them on video games, think about them in like say Roblox or just on Snap, right? So virtual isn't necessarily the thing that is the roadblock. Maybe it's how we ask them to share. It might be the roadblock, right? And how do we make that safe? So something that I love doing with parents and with kids when I'm doing groups is I will say like, turn to your left, or right, you'll adapt this for Zoom, right? I'm going to mess up and that's okay, right? You're going to mess up and that's okay. right? Just invite, like taking some of the potential shame out of the room, right? And maybe you do that at the beginning of every session, right? Like, all right, now's a chance to like just mess up, like remind them of that. Also, like just show that it's cool to share stuff. Like maybe it's something creative, like, hey, like show me something like that you drew, right? There's some shared whiteboard projects. Oh, go
I
for
think
it.
she's gonna say something.
Oh, sorry, my dogs are barking. That's why I keep muting myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, our course is actually project-based learning, so there is a project each week
Oh,
that
cool.
they do.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I think in the allyship one, they're doing music and recording a song, and there's definitely
Oh, that's really cool.
yeah, there's definitely the creative aspect going on, which is great. But I think it's just like kind of what you guys see. Not that we're not participating, but it's always that thing of like, who wants to share? And then it's like,
Yeah. I also think that something that, I mean, virtual is so hard, but I think also just in the present moment. So just asking them what's happening right now and engaging in activity right now is a lot more digestible for them than asking broader questions of like, there's so much going on in the world, tell us all your feelings, because that is so uncomfortable and
yeah,
even for us. And so I have found that in my groups, my virtual groups right now, I really have to take right now, like what's happening to you right now. And even if that's you being resistant, okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about you not, like maybe not wanting to share, because that again, getting them to get good at feeling, not feeling good, right? You're in that moment, exposing them to tolerate difficult emotions.
yeah. No, I love that. That's really good advice.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of like to piggyback off what Vero was saying, like, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now. Is anyone else feeling uncomfortable? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Being vulnerable.
I had a
Go for
couple.
it, Ashley.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts on that too, and it might be something that y'all are already implementing. I don't know, but just a couple things that came to mind, like maybe it's the speaker or the presentation, like starting first, like they share something personal to sort of make them feel more comfortable that you're willing to share. And then another thing I thought could potentially be fun is like maybe someone starts or you start and then you tag someone, like so and so, I tag you, like you go next.
Oh, I like that.
Oh, that's a good idea. Well, I know Violet and I both like end up, and it's just like Violet and I talking to each other. We're like,
Yeah.
we're just having a conversation. The kids are like listening. But I like so we definitely are starting off sharing. But I like the tagging thing. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing that I was going to say, and again, you may already be doing this, is I always feel more comfortable sort of when someone initially starts by saying like, there's no wrong answer, you know, like just whatever comes to your mind, that's okay. Like, you know, just make them feel comfortable by saying nothing that you're going to say is dumb or wrong, or no one's going to judge you. Like this is a safe space, you know, just sort of making that really clear and known.
Yeah, just putting that out there. Violet's really good at that. She's like boss of that. Shout out to Violet back there. Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Ash, too.
I also just think it's hard because we're working with middle school and high school kids. So this is like the main time where they feel, you know, like they're going to be judged by others, or if they say something embarrassing, everyone's going to laugh. I just sat with like a kid this morning for over an hour to get him on Zoom. And he finally opened up that the reason he didn't want to get into his classes is because he didn't want his friends to know he was at the Boys and Girls Club. Because that's embarrassing for them, you know, at some points and for some kids.
Yeah.
So it's really just like working with them to make sure, like, can we meet in the middle? But especially when you're sharing, we're asking them about vulnerable things like Jess was talking about. We usually share and give examples, and then we have like one or two kids that will jump in and share, and then that kind of starts getting it going, which is nice.
And like I said, we feel bad because like we know our kids that are most likely to share. So when I was giving advice to Tamika, who's running the allyship program, I was like, if you know, I don't want to name names, but if she's in your class, you can ask her. And then I was like, oh man, like I don't want to like always put this girl on the spot because I know that she'll participate and that'll help me get other people. But then I feel bad for her. Do you know what I mean?
I think once they share, then they're all going to be more comfortable
Yeah.
sharing too.
And also just, I mean, it sounds like you have a co-facilitator where you kind of end up talking is what you said. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I also just like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know we want our kids to participate, but again, the baseline is different. And by you being open and labeling these feelings, they're still taking it in, they're still listening, and you're normalizing things that maybe no one has normalized for them, and labeling feelings that they might not know they're having.
Yeah, I hope so.
The other thing,
So we hope we're getting through.
And maybe we'll take this last one and then we'll start winding it down.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, go for it.
Have another question?
Or is there anyone else?
I literally just had one more thought on Jess's thing. I was gonna say, I hate being put on the spot. Like maybe if you say like, okay, well, let's come back to this. Like grab your notebook, jot down some thoughts, and then, maybe we'll come back to this, and maybe they'll feel a little bit more comfortable sharing after they've gotten a chance to sort of write some things down and think through it, rather than just like, oh, I need to spit something out of my mouth right now. And so maybe that's a little less daunting.
Yeah, I think it's also just like everything going on. It's so hard right now, especially the allyship program they're running. I mean, everything's so sensitive, the subject matter. So, but yeah, that's a good one too. Thanks, Ash. Appreciate it.
Girl.
Thanks, guys.
I really enjoyed this last part where everyone was just jumping in and really helping to support, because these programs are all going on and ongoing, and they are here to stay with us, and we really want to make an impact in the community. And I think that's the shared passion, is really, focusing on the kids, helping them, feel comfortable and confident to, as you put it, Vero, feeling, feeling good about feeling, and that's okay, feeling all their feelings. And so I just want to thank both of you so much. I really enjoyed today's training. I know you couldn't see my expressions, but trust me, I was really enjoying all of them, especially the visual for the window of tolerance. I think that's an important one for us to think about, and for ourselves, for the kids, for the parents, for our clients. That's all important. So thank you so much. And I guess this will conclude today's training, and I really appreciate everyone participating on the call. Like they mentioned, you have Randy and myself to support you guys, Supan as well, and we just want to be able to listen to you guys and to support you in any way that we can as we're doing all of this work. So let's keep talking about that window of tolerance, okay? All right, thank you guys. Thanks everyone.